part one of your presentation. It wasn't 100% clear to me why the way that you explicitly modeled the interaction between the proximate and the ultimate processes was necessary for getting the kinds of effects you got, given that, the way the mutation was structured was such that you can't have fully selfish individuals invade. So suppose you had a system where you assume that the strategies vary along a continuous cycle in terms of how cooperative they are, and you assume mutation the way that you did in your model. Couldn't you get the same results that
so that's a good question, actually. And I have two answers to that. So one of them is kind of the question that we set out to answer, which is, can other regarding motivations evolve, is not well defined if you don't define what motivations are and what motivations do. So I think kind of in the biological question that we ask, if you want, you can do a model which gives you cooperation, and then you can interpret this as, well, okay, this cooperation can be maintained by other regarding motivations, but then that wouldn't be modeling motivations explicitly. Okay, so that's kind of one, kind of by definition we wanted to model that type of answer. The other answer is slightly more technical, and the reason that we did that on analysis, and it's like, for example, the ESS condition ends up not depending on the proximate mechanism itself, is basically because of this equilibrium assumption that we make, and that turns out to be a general pattern in lots of these types of models. We're certainly not the only one who's doing this two-tiered models where you have some kind of behavior dynamics and you reach equilibrium and then you get fitness. And any kind of those, all of these models actually have the same feature or problem depending on your point of view, where the equilibrium, it only matters that the equilibrium moves, and it doesn't matter what moves the equilibrium, or it only matters that the action is changed by the mutant, and doesn't matter what the mutant does to change the action. So in that sense, yes, it doesn't matter what the proximate mechanism is that generates the response coefficient. But then you have to, what the proximate mechanism does is it generates this link between what the actions are and what the response coefficients are. Okay, so and this is kind of this is actually related to John's question, that you need to be able to say, okay, here's the evolutionary stable response coefficient rho, and then here's the evolutionary stable behavior that is induced by that response coefficient rho, and the proximate mechanism basically allows you to do both of these things at the same time. Yeah.
So the kind of exchange was discussed at a very broad level. It was sort of like, you scratch my back, I scratch yours, and plug it in. And you gave the example of two individuals teaming up against a predator, for example, or carrots and apples. Yeah. I was just, if somebody wanted to take this overall model and then apply it to a more specific sub case, what would you do concretely with the model? I guess you would find out those parameters that are unique to fighting.
Yeah. So I think you would need to do two things. One of them is you would need to model the payoff functions. Basically, you would have to do a sub-model of where the payoff function comes from, like what individual one does A, individual two does the B, and then what's the benefit out of it.
Would you look to the actual literature for those numbers, or like in terms of day-to-day?
That's what you would do. Yes, exactly. And there are models of parental defense and parental provisioning, which are still fairly abstract, but there are some instances where they've been parameterized in the literature. I mean, I'm most familiar with the bird literature, so and there are some models definitely in the bird literature that are kind of closer to the data in that respect. But then the other thing that you would have to do is, so like I said, I'm not claiming realism for this other regarding motivations model. So if I was asked to do a model of a real species, and if it had any real world implications, like for example conserving that species or not, I would have to go and make sure that the motivation model that I use is actually accurate. Whereas here the point is really my kind of a theoretical point. When you have this behavioral responses, you actually get this pattern, which you wouldn't expect, or which you wouldn't expect from just the evolutionary model, right? So, yeah, that's what I would do. Any other questions?
So I apologize for missing the first part of the lecture, so this may be a stupid question. So it seems to me there's this paper by Lehman and Keller and
Yeah.
And in that paper they have so they're on the kin selection side.
Yeah.
And they have this parameter which they interpret as a measure of reciprocity. So
Yeah.
they constrain the actors to be linear responders to previous behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And it ends up being just like, it enters the equations just like relatedness, like yours does. So, and you said it's a one-shot interaction, but it really seems to me that by assuming the behavioral, and I didn't see the first part of your lecture, I have read,
Yeah.
as you know, previous papers.
Yeah.
It seems to me it's just reciprocity by another name. So,
Yeah. Well. Okay. So is that a question?
well, and then I'm going to complain about the n-person version of it.
Okay.
What you said about little mutants and them bumping into each other gets way harder when you have n little mutants that have to bump into each other.
Okay.
Too.
Okay. So for the first part, it is similar reciprocities. I don't necessarily disagree with that, although there's a semantic kind of neck of woods that I might retreat to, which is in these models of reciprocity, there is no so reciprocity is either treated like the Triver's reciprocal altruism paper. Reciprocity is either treated as an explicit notion of oh, you helped me before, so I will help you now, type of thinking, and we don't have that kind of motivations, okay, in this model. So at that level, this is different than reciprocity, because if you took these animals, if these animals actually existed, and if you took them and then or if these were humans even, and then asked them, or do you actually care about this other person's payoff, welfare, material welfare? These individuals, when they are other regarding, they will say yes, and you could tie them up to a lie detector, and it will pass, right? So at that level, it's not reciprocity, because they actually genuinely care about the other guy's payoff. But at the functional level, if you will, what the effect of these motivations, that ends up being basically the same as reciprocity, because what the only thing that you need is this correlation between your action and the other guy's action, okay? And reciprocity generates such a correlation, and other regarding motivations generate such a correlation, and so on. And that's why we kind of, in the second part, we kind of treat this rho response coefficient as kind of an index first, but then turns out then to first order it's unimportant. To second order though, it becomes important, because if you do the second order ESS or the second order the CSS conditions, then it becomes important where rho comes from, because then you are dealing with changes in rho as the phenotype changes. So that, I mean, that's kind of my half concede and half not concede answer to that.
So I still want to hear what you have to say about getting away from zero when it's n instead of n's 100 instead of 2. But
yeah.
Just to, I mean, it's really not fair to call these one-shot interactions.
Yeah.
Because in a one-shot interaction, your behavior doesn't affect the other guy's behavior. That's the key. That's the definition.
Yeah.
Of it, right? And this whole thing runs because behavior generates assortment. And you've constrained the mechanism such that it has to generate. It can only generate assortment. You can't have. I mean, you've taken the space of possible reciprocal strategies and restricted it to basically positive, monotonic, responsive strategies, right? So I do something nice to you, you do something nice to me.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, there's actually, I mean, I didn't show you that, but beta actually can be negative, in which case you get negative responses. But it's just not evolutionary stable. So it's a bad thing to do, but it can happen.
But it's still monotonic. I mean, you do something, right? So, I mean, in general, reciprocal strategies can be very complicated, right? You can have tit for two-tat, you can have standing dependent strategy, you can have all kinds of complicated things, which are not possible in this world. Well, maybe they are possible. They weren't
well, I mean,
possible.
again, so again, okay. So to come back to this one shot, so I kind of go back and forth in that, and sometimes it's you're right. It's essentially because we allow individuals to respond to each other. It has this notion of it has this notion of dynamics, and basically that means that there's some repeated interaction, or there's some prolonged interaction.
The discount parameter is 0.
Yeah. Well, but that's a consequence of the assumption that we evaluate payoff at the equilibrium. Okay. Right. So we don't do the transient dynamics, and that's both. I mean, that's what it allows us to get these nice analytic results, but it's also a constraint. I agree. So I call it one shot, and you might be right that I shouldn't have called it, but I call it one shot because for two things. One of them is that we evaluate payoff just once within the lifetime of the individual at the equilibrium, and the other one is basically there is no notion of reciprocity, like, okay, in the past you have helped me, and now I'm going to do this, because there's no memory or anything like that. So that's the meaning I meant in this one shot thing, okay, so yeah, and with regard to the more complicated responses, I think so in the models that we've actually built, there's again, because of this equilibrium assumption, there is no going back and forth between different actions and different type of responses. But I don't. There's no intrinsic reason why we shouldn't be. Why we can't do a model like that in such a framework. So, and I might come back. Should I come back to the N person mutant later?
If there are, I mean, I left being a latecomer. I feel
answer his question first.
Okay, so I'll just say that was for the 2-player game. So we actually, for the N-player game, we don't. I don't know whether there's a case where we would need N mutant interactions. But I think even the N-player case, I think N-player groups, I think 2-player mutants actually might be sufficient. But I would have to think more about that. So
in repeated public goods games, normally in reciprocity models, you use a little bit of relatedness to get started rather than, so this is Axel and Hamilton's suggestion, and a lot of other people have taken it up. It turns out that, I mean, just think about it, there's some threshold number you need to make profit in a public goods game.
Yeah.
You've got to get at least that number of guys together. Yeah. And if that number is very big, it's going to be something like geometric with the number of where the roots are, right? So
so that kind of gets into a different question. I feel I think than we I mean, I think we didn't put in. We kind of assume N is constant, so individuals come together in these groups of N no matter what they do, and there's some average relatedness in these groups of N. So, so we haven't modeled the group formation stage. We don't have a model of that so far.
Well, for lots of animals, the groups are formed for some other reason.
But I think given the group has formed, to get cooperation going, so you can interpret the kind of initial emergence of cooperation as a non-cooperation, as the continuous stability of the non-cooperation state equilibrium. So and my guess would be you would get some kind of threshold relatedness for that one too, to make the non-cooperation unstable basically.
It's very high.
And
it goes up very fast with groups.
That might be possible. I haven't looked at it, but yeah. Thanks for the comment, I guess.
maybe I missed something from
Sure.
Dan's talk, but I see a big difference between the second part, which I like very much, and the first part that I'm not very dubious actually. And I think there's some confusion with mathematics and concept, unless I misunderstood the first part. So in the second part, I see that you are modeling the evolution of preferences, which is a great idea. Others have done it, but not enough, as you say, like interest and some of this, but this is something that should be done. And you frame it in the set of group selection.
Yeah.
And it's it looks good, right? I understand the mechanism. The first part, you are saying it's a one shot, and you don't. So it's not reciprocal outreach, right?
Yeah.
Because it's one shot.
I mean, given the caveat that I just mentioned, yeah, it's not really one shot, but it's kind of one shot.
If it's repeated, then I start understanding, and I would say one should look at the dynamics.
Yeah.
But other than this, honestly, when you say a large mutation, which would cause an individual to become completely selfish, is ruled out because the model breaks down, I think.
Oh well, it's so once cooperation is established, once other regard is established, selfish individuals just don't cut it basically because
in your model.
Yeah, in this model.
Which I
yeah.
would say means your model is bad. No, I mean,
well,
reality doesn't have to adapt to your model. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, again, like I said, I mean, I don't claim a lot of realism to this model, but I think the reason why selfish individuals don't cut it actually is quite general, because it actually also ties down to this question of whether the payoff function is multiplicative or not, or the objective function is multiplicative or not, because for example, what a multiplicative objective function gives you is the product of your payoff times the other guy's payoff. So if your product is higher, if your payoff is higher, okay, then your regard, let's say, for your partner's payoff is higher as well. So there's this property of conditional regard in the objective functions. And the consequence of that is if you're playing with someone who's selfish, your payoff will go down very, very rapidly because they will not invest anything, they will not donate anything. So with that goes your regard for your selfish partner's payoff. So if you're playing with a selfish partner, you become selfish too, in effect.
That's what maybe I'm missing. But I don't understand in one shot how.
No, so again, so it's not really. I mean, there is this behavioral dynamics leading to an equilibrium, right? So therefore, it doesn't behave like a regular one-shot game.
So you should talk later.
Yeah, we can talk about it. I mean, so maybe I shouldn't have said the one-shot phrase, but the way I meant it was that you evaluate payoff only once, and there's no keeping track of previous behavior. It's only local current payoff that matters for what you do next, basically. So that's how I meant one-shot, and I would concede that it is similar to it is actually. It has a repeated game essence in it, and that's what it makes it work basically. So what you say is correct, and so in a one-shot interaction, if you put something on the table, I put something on the table separately, and we all take whatever is given to us and go home, then there's no scope for behavioral responses. Okay, this is not a model like that.
So are you finding a way to model reciprocal altruism? Which is new,
Yeah. So again, do you consider reciprocity or reciprocal altruism in a functional way or in an actual description of motivations? In a functional way, you could argue that this is a model of reciprocity. In a actual motivational way, this is not. So.
Okay, I think we're going to leave it there.
Okay. Thank you.